Hi folks, welcome back to my Obsidian Mirror podcast installment for the last quarter moon. Today's May Day, Beltane, and May Day, I'm a radical. I consider myself sort of a radical person in terms of being a leftist and an anarchist, and so I also celebrate the workers' movement of May Day on a day like today. So without further ado, I'll get into the last quarter moon gaze messages and archetypes that came through just now. Today was a little bit different than the last reading that I had a lot of several lead-in kinds of sites or information that came through ahead of doing the actual gaze itself. Today that didn't happen. But one thing I have noticed, and I just thought I would make a quick mention, is that it seems that if I fast on the day that I'm scrying, it's smoother. It goes a little bit easier for me, which makes sense when you think about food being so grounding. And if you're doing sort of a flying, like a witchy flying through sight, through a mirror gaze, it helps to fast so that you're not quite as tied down that way energetically. So the session I just sat down to do, I sat down and opened the mirror, and after a minute, the first thing that I saw was a lit or sort of vibrant, like shimmering DNA helix. So that was lovely to see and kind of felt very life affirming. The energy felt very positive around the double helix, and that shimmering light quality to it was quite lovely. And then I had what's another thing that I've been noticing that's interesting is the last couple scrying sessions have been less than 5 minutes, but full of visual imagery. So I've had to, what I feel like, not do it for long because so much comes through that there really isn't a lot needed. I don't have to sit for a long time. I get a fairly thorough direct message, and that happened tonight anyways. I guess I shouldn't speak too soon, but tonight I only gazed for like 4 minutes probably, but it came in fairly direct sequence. So there was the DNA helix, and then that kind of shimmered towards or moved in space towards what was a quivering and pulsing breast of a bird, like a pheasant, that have really those emphasized looking breasts, especially when they're displaying their feathers. And so that double helix kind of led my eye in this shimmering way towards this quivering, pulsing red breast of a bird. It was very beautiful and pulsating, and it's almost like you could see the heart of the bird inside it, beating inside it, almost like it was backlit. So there was kind of this warm yellow light, and you could see kind of this pulsing red inside the breast of the bird. It was very beautiful. Then that breast of the pheasant became women's breasts, and they were very lit and warm with this kind of pink orange flame, almost shimmering, but in a slightly different quality to the DNA helix. But they were very beautiful, kind of fertile, just breasts basically, that were also kind of shimmering with that pretty light quality and pulsating, almost like flame at times. And then from those, that shifted into a pregnant and pulsing womb, not necessarily of a woman, but of a mammal for sure. It almost became alarming, the level of pulsing, with the message being that this womb is about to birth or burst open with whatever the baby is within, right? It was very lit. It was pulsing. I had this funny thought that I initially wrote off as just my own distracting thoughts, but it'll mean more here in a second. But I thought to myself, it almost reminded me of the movie Alien, right? So that was kind of something that I thought was a distraction, and I disregarded and just kind of chuckled to myself about it. And then went back into the mirror, and from that womb, and that flame of the sort of feminine fertility imagery became a monk. And this would be a Buddhist monk who was seated in prayer in the lotus position on a mat. And he was seated and then at times bowing, and then seated and then bowing. And it was serene and it was a peaceful scene. The strange thing that happened next that I'm going to try to refrain from interpreting, other than I'll say a couple words at the end here of the full gaze to just give my 2 cents on it very briefly. So the monk then shifted and he was now sledding, like he was on a sled going down a hill. And instead of seated in prayer and meditation, he was flying down this mountain on a sled, like maybe in the Himalayas or something, and enjoying himself. And then all of a sudden it flashed into my mind about the movie Cool Runnings, which was this sort of unlikely way that you would see these Jamaican people wanting to do bobsledding as a sport, right? So there was that kind of reference that came through again. So there's this monk who you would think of as this very serene noble, all of a sudden broken out of that and sledding down this hill. Then that shifted away from the monk imagery and into the Yeti. So the Yeti is Sasquatch, right? Only, and I'm a believer in Sasquatch, and that's an aside. And there's kind of a parallel story about Sasquatch running through this reading that I'm not going to pull all the way in because some of it's personal. But there's a Yeti showing me there, and he's doing a dance, essentially like a dance, that a ceremonial dance that people would do in celebration of nature, like you would see people doing around a maypole, or you would see people dancing in appreciation for a harvest, or to ask something from the heavens, right? Like this Yeti was doing a ceremonial dance like that, but he was white, which made me know he was a Yeti. And especially because he was sort of in the presence of that monk. So that was really special, I thought, and cool and unexpected for sure. Then that scene went away and it became a very supplicant monk, like a German monk. And it was the kind of monks that I initially grew up knowing about through my father. My father worked in the brewing industry and made beer and was very proud of German beer making history, including beer being perceived of as a food and also a spiritual product, and that monks used to brew beer and became really craftsmen at brewing beer. And so this was that kind of monk. It was no longer a Buddhist monk in the Himalayas. It was now like a German monk, living monastic life, brewing beer. But he was in a supplicant mode. He was bowing and praying as well, like the other monk had been. And I could see behind him a candelabra that you would see at an altar. And it was also lit up. And again, the lit candles were the same flaming fire as the breast of the bird and the breasts of the feminine figure that I saw earlier, which was really interesting and beautiful. So as he was praying, let's see, I'm trying to read my notes here. They're a little bit scribbly. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is now the third kind of movie reference that came through. So as this monk is bowing and praying and supplicant in the Christian way, like maybe in a Catholic way, in a Catholic monastery of old, all of a sudden the monk looked like he was making the gesture that Princess Leia was making in that little clip recording in R2-D2 where she says, "Help me, Obi-Wan." It's like a hologram message. And she's saying, "Help us, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're our only hope." And it just repeats that over and over, that little holographic message of her begging for help. Only it was reversed. It wasn't her begging for help. It was the monk begging for help to Princess Leia. But the monk was in the supplicant mode. The monk was the one begging for the help of Princess Leia and not the other way around. So these movies and pop culture references really blow my mind and are fascinating to me. So, I mean, and there's humor running through this reading as well. I just want to say it felt sort of light and humorous, honestly. Then the last thing I saw after I kind of was being shown that hologram that was the monk acting like Princess Leia, that went away, and then it became a cell, like a cell that we know in biology with the nucleus. And that was lit up as well with that kind of shimmering light of the pink and orange flame. And then that felt like enough to me. I was already worried that I wasn't going to be able to remember all that, because it just came flooding through really seamlessly in perfect flow without any interruption or waiting. And so the only thing I'll just say I'm not going to try to interpret it, other than I'll say I think that pop culture references are coming up in these gazes for me, because they're a way for these to seem less mysterious and more accessible to us, with frames of reference that a modern community can understand, that connect. And often the ways that we all connect are through media and nostalgia of old movies, old shows, pop culture. This is quite American, I realize that. But American media has really become global, right? And culture making, for better or worse, in many places. And I think that might be partly why. That's just my little theory. I don't know if that's true or not. But to me, that makes sense, that these images would be showing up because they're references that we understand. So anyways, now I'm going to move on to just pulling a couple cards here. My cat has laid down on my cards, so I got to... You know how cats like to do that, lay on your keyboard or lay down on your phone. So now I'm just going to pull a couple cards here for this reading. And I have to tell you, compared to the last one, I appreciate the lightness of it. I needed a little bit of levity after all that deep water. And I kind of feel levity through that pink and orange flame in a way. And the pink flame and the orange flame and the blue flame and different colored flames have spiritual meaning. So that's something to know, which was not lost on me. Oh yeah, there was one more thought that I had about it that actually it didn't come from me. It came from like the Obsidian mirror as a teacher. Also, that part of the reason it's showing us, or me, images from media, specifically from two-dimensional visual media like television and cinema, is that as I'm gazing into the Obsidian mirror, it's showing me our pop cultural black mirror, right? Which is also a form of an obsidian mirror in a way, because we're all gazing through the ether at one another through the black mirror of television and cinema, right? So that's a kind of an abstract concept, but I'm glad I didn't forget to mention it, because I wrote it down huge at the bottom of my notes. So it was like a reflection, like me gazing into the obsidian mirror in some ways is like us gazing into a screen, a black mirror, like the show, right? Our phones are types of black mirrors. Our screens too. So I'll pull a few cards here, and that'll close out this mirror scrying session. Thank you so much for being here. The sun. Yeah, that levity that we were just mentioning, and that pink and blue, or pink and orange flame. It's so refreshing to have had a light, humorous reading coming through here that's almost celebratory, especially at such a dark time in the world. I kind of needed it, and it feels comforting, like a spiritual form of comfort. During dark times like this Four of Cups that we're in, where there's a lot of blocked heart energy and a lot of dark things happening in the world. And in this context right next to the sun, it shows me like sort of a block and a refusal at times to let that in. I don't know what else. The Queen of Pentacles, that pregnant womb that I think sometimes the Princess of Pentacles is more often, if there's a princess in the deck, considered the pregnancy. But here, and for me as a reader with the Queen of Pentacles is often a pregnant, abundant card, and for many readers. And so this levity and light and pregnancy up against this Four of Cups, I think, is super fascinating. I'm going to pull 3 more text-based cards here for that. Tell us more about the Sun, the 4 of Cups, and the Queen of Pentacles. Especially the 4 of Cups. What is the message of the 4 of Cups here? Your realness is rare. So perhaps a 4 of Cups, stagnant or blocked heart energy, can kind of reflect not being real fully with ourselves. If we're not living or allowing our heart-based parts of us, regardless of gender or how we grew up or whatever, if we're not connecting with our heart, we're not being fully real. And it doesn't matter that this is a culture that doesn't necessarily reward people for connecting with our hearts or not. The truth is, at some points, it's also an individual journey. And they're, you know, so realness is allowing yourself to connect with your heart. And ancestry. This involves an ancestral pattern. Look to your lineage or bloodline, and it showed that with that DNA helix right at the beginning. And then the last card, you are safe and cherished. You are loved. So we're safe and cherished through these insane transitions and perhaps earth-based ascension that we're going through. Some people might call it the new earth. Some people might call it this is the dying of the old. And in spite of the trauma that's happening, it's the death throes of the old way. And that the new era is arising where that will be anti-colonial, anti-oppression, right? Where the heart center is respected, where the feminine polarity of energy is respected and once again, and in alignment and in harmony. We're in an imbalanced masculine state on a social level, right? So anyways, and those are the cards. I mean, I can kind of extrapolate somewhat, but those are the cards that came out again. That's not necessarily me. Those are the cards that I pulled, although that is my deck. I'll say that. So that's my framework that I've applied there. So know that. Take what you like and leave the rest. And thank you so much. I'll be back next time, a week from now, for the Obsidian Mirror podcast installment. Thank you.